we are going to paint some happy fluid clouds. If you have a fluid container, which you can create right here, by default it comes with a emitter, and the emitter emits density into the fluid shape. And you can use that for all kinds of fun simulations, but if you just want some clouds in specific places or some fog in a specific spot, it might be easier to just paint the contents. First, we want to set up our box to have sort of a nice shape for our clouds, sort of elongated box. So let's go to our attribute editor and look at the The size is 10 by 10 by 10 by default with a base resolution of 10. Let's make it wider. Let's make it like 50. Make it a little bit less high and maybe a bit deeper. That's a nice box for our clouds. The voxel size has grown for some reason. The boxes are now bigger. That is because the base resolution is the resolution along the X, and the X is now 50. So if we want voxels that are 10 by 10, we can increase the base resolution to 50. They'll still be all square voxels, but we just have a little bit more to work with. So say this is our box, and just turning the grid off, so we're just looking at the fluid box. We want to paint content, so we do not need that emitter that's sitting in there. So we're going to select the emitter and get rid of it. It's an empty box. The paint tool, I already have it down here, but you can find it in Fluids, Add, Edit Content, Paint Fluids tool. And if you hit the box, you also get the tool settings. By default, you paint density and a value of 1. That's all good. You could flood it so it's completely full. But I'm just going to go to my box, select my box, go to the paint tool, and now we get this weird kind of, let's get rid of the tool settings for a second, this thing there. So there's a specific plane selected, and if you look at it in a different direction, now there's a vertical plane selected, and now there's a horizontal plane selected depending on how you look at it. And if you look at it like this, it switches to this side, and you can drag it back and forth. So you can select sort of where you want to paint. So if I paint a happy cloud here, it doesn't really do much. It's only on that specific plane. And you can just push it forward a little, one voxel, and paint another bit. Push it forward a little and paint another bit. And you see that it doesn't really update instantly. It sort of updates when you let go or when you move the selection tool. So this is going to take forever if I do it like this, so I might just want to paint in the top view, but it's kind of hard if you move that it switches between which pane you're painting on. So let's just take like the middle pane and lock the thing. So however you look at it, you will always keep that same pane selected. So now we can paint some funny happy little clouds in there, and then we can unlock it and go up one voxel level and paint a little bit more in there, and maybe get some stuff there and there. And oh, I forgot to lock it, so I painted in a different plane. That's not a big deal. I just actually want to go up. It can be kind of hard to grab that thing, as you can see. Oh, I locked it, so you can't grab it. Please go up. There we go. And I'm locking it, so now I can paint in that plane. Sometimes if you move it about, it also suddenly updates. And let's move it again. Boop, go up and lock it again. More painting. So that's sort of where you want your clouds to live. You can actually see all the individual planes you painted. These are actually the voxels represented in flat planes. So that's it. That's how you can paint clouds in a fluid or can paint density. Let's just go to my tool and show that the auto set initial state is on because it needs to remember what you painted. However, even though the auto set initial state is on, if you go to attribute editor and you select the fluid shape, and it actually now, because I leave the tool, it says I want to actually save the initial state. There it is, initial state fluid shape. There's no file name, however. So even though it's saved in the program, it's not saved to disk yet. In order to save the initial state to disk, you have to save the file, or at least save the file first. So I'm going to save the file as happy clouds.00.mb, so I can use increment and save. And I've got my happy clouds. And as soon as I save it, you see that there's a happy clouds cache file, which is located in the data folder of your project. So we could just use this as is. You can actually see a bit where I painted the voxel, so it's not quite nice. It would be nicer if it's sort of dispersed a little. So you can use it as is if you, for instance, turn off the dynamic grid and make it static in the content method. But we can also animate it. Well, have it animated by being simulated. If we simply play this, you see that it just disperses quite a bit and moves up, and eventually it will all be up in the top of the give it a few more frames, move up into the top where it will sort of gather against the ceiling. That is because in fluids the gravity by default is pointing up. We want these clouds just to move horizontally, so I'm going to turn off gravity. That's step one. But I do want some movement. Now they just disperse slowly. To make them move horizontally, I'm going to add, with the fluid shape selected, I'm going to add a uniform force, which is just going to push it. And if I do that, it will very slowly push it. You need to really push up the magnitude on the uniform fields to get any sensible movement. And you see it actually pushes. But now everything just ends up on the right side of the box. By default, in fluids, if we go up, all the sides are boundaries, so the fluids can never escape the shape. We do want it to get out on this side, which is the X, but we actually want to leave on this side and return back on the other side, and that's called wrapping. So any content that leaves the box on the right returns on the left, and then you can get sort of nice moving clouds. But they sort of completely disperse. They don't stick together very well. So we want to play a little bit with the parameters of the dynamic simulation. If you make it very viscous, it will stay together more. So you could just make it really viscous. It still sort of loses shape. So if instead of viscosity we turn on from the liquid section, which is not active, but the bottom four parameters are active regardless of whether you're using liquid simulation. If we use a density tension, that which sort of indicates how much it wants to stick together, if we put it on 5, we get, whoop, it all plops together into little blobs, so that's way too much. So what if we make the density tension sort of 0.5 and then add a little bit of viscosity also to sort of 0.5 and then make it flow? They get nicer together and then they start flowing nicely and sort of keep the shape. So this could be good work as sort of flowing clouds, but as you see, they keep going faster and faster because that uniform force we apply to it keeps accelerating. It keeps applying more and more force, and there's nothing to stop the clouds, so they keep accelerating. So in our uniform field, which I called push it, the magnitude is 50. We want to turn it off at some point. So we're going to look at like where has it got some of a good speed. Let's say this is an okay speed, so around 100. So at frame 100, I'm going to set a keyframe on the magnitude and not suddenly turn it off, but give it a few frames to turn off to 0. And set another keyframe. So at frame 100, the force will stop pushing it and the speed will remain constant. Just as a reminder, make sure you are playing every frame, otherwise the fluid simulation doesn't work properly. So let's look at this. It's going, starting up, and then at this point it's reaching sort of a good speed, and we'll just keep flowing, and we have something that we might like as happy little clouds. Well, they're not little, they're just clouds. So that's quick how you can use painting to add density and create sort of cloud shapes, and then play with some of the dynamic parameters to keep them as sort of clouds and not completely dispersed. And then making them look really good is another story. That has to do with texturing, shading, and noise, and that will be a different movie.